Today we're out here with the 8th generation 2018 Toyota Camry. Families seem to be moving away from mid-size sedans in America towards crossovers, so the role of the four-door American family sedan has been changing lately, and that's definitely evident with the 2018 Camry, because the Camry is now more stylish, more sporty than it ever has been before. For 2018, this is an all-new model, which is also unusual for Toyota, because they generally prefer evolution rather than revolution. For 2018, the Camry gets an all-new look up front, and actually gets two all-new looks, because what we're looking at now is the S front end. You'll find this in the SE and the XSE models, which are the sportier trims. Then there is a slightly less sporty-looking bumper in the L, LE, and XLE. The big difference is right down here in this area. I'll go ahead and pop a picture on your screen so you can see the difference between the two front ends, but you should know that the front end changes also apply to the hybrid models, so you can get the hybrid in SE trim as well. Also new for 2018, all Camry models get full LED headlamps, and that includes the base L trim. Now the headlamps do change as you go from one trim level to the other, but they're always going to be full LEDs for the high beam and the low beam. Behind this large Toyota logo hides a radar sensor because all Camry models now come standard with Toyota's latest safety systems. Toyota recently announced that all of their vehicles will have their latest suite of active safety systems standard in their effort to try and reduce accidents and injuries in their vehicles. And for 2018, the Camry has their latest package, which they call TSSP. This comes in two slightly different forms depending on the trim level that you get. All models have standard radar adaptive cruise control, auto high beams, lane keeping assistance, pedestrian detection with autonomous braking, and pre-collision warning. And that's driven by that radar sensor right there in the nose of the vehicle and a camera that's placed right here behind the windscreen. The radar adaptive cruise control in those base models is not a full speed range system, so it won't take you to a complete stop. However, if you get the top end trims, like the one that we're driving right here, then it does become a full speed range system, and we also get things like blind spot information. There's also a brand new large heads-up display if you get the V6 Camry. At 192.7 inches long, the Camry has become a little bit longer for 2018. But the biggest change is actually the wheelbase, and that's the distance between the front tires and the back tires. That's increased by a whopping 2 inches, which is a pretty big move. And that's because the Camry is now riding on a completely different platform than it has before. The term platform is a little overused in our industry, but basically it means the bin of parts available to assemble the car. What manufacturers tend to do is they tend to design crash systems, suspension systems, floor pan designs, seat designs, etc. in common, and then they mix and match those parts to make vehicles. So when people say that this car is on a different platform than the old Camry, all it really means is that the designers of this car had access to an entirely different bin of parts. Also made from this same bin of parts, interestingly enough, is the brand new Toyota Prius, the European Toyota Auris, and oddly enough, the Lexus LC and LS, even though they are rear-wheel drive vehicles and this is a front-wheel drive vehicle. Now obviously more parts are shared between this and the Prius and the Auris than this and the Lexus model, but it gives you an idea of exactly how that works. As I've said before, mid-size sedans tend to fall into two different categories. Sedans that are more family-focused, like the Accord and the Camry right here. You can tell because we have this larger rear window and a roofline that stays a little bit higher towards the rear, that gives rear passengers more room. And then we have very stylized vehicles in this segment, like the Mazda 6 or the Ford Fusion, which definitely seem to prioritize style over rear seat comfort. Although the Camry has become longer for 2018, we don't get any more rear headroom, and the trunk remains about the same size. The rear of the Camry is not quite as stylized as the front. It looks a little bit more like the previous generation Camry, but it's still obvious that they were after a sporty mission with this model. The SE Hybrid trim, which is what we're driving here, has twin exhaust tips over there on the driver's side, and if you get the XSE with the V6, then you actually get quad exhaust tips for the first time ever in a Camry. The rear end does change a little bit, depending on whether you get the S trims or the L trims, but all models do have LED tail lamps. There's also a slight spoiler right here on top of the trunk lid, and you'll find the backup camera right below the Toyota logo. 2018 also brings an all-new engine lineup. Things start out with a new 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine that features direct injection and port injection. That produces either 203 or 206 horsepower depending on the model that you get. That's a pretty big bump from last year's 178 horsepower, but perhaps the biggest difference for 2018, even in the base model, is that we now get a new 8-speed automatic. If that's not enough power for you, there is also an all-new 3.5-liter V6 that produces 301 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque. That engine also features direct and port injection and uses the 8-speed automatic as well. Thanks to the 8-speed automatic and the brand new engine designs, fuel economy takes a healthy jump up to 32 to 34 miles per gallon for the 2.5-liter engine, 26 miles per gallon combined for the V6. The hybrid system is also all new for 2018, and it uses the same 2.5-liter engine as the base model, tuned to an Atkinson cycle. That makes it produce 176 horsepower, but when coupled with the electric motors, you get 208 combined under this hood. That's good for 46 or 52 miles per gallon combined, depending on the trim level that you get. 52 miles per gallon is found in the base model. If you get the XLE or the SE trim, which is what we're driving right here, then it drops down to 46 miles per gallon. There are two big reasons for that. The first is the SE and the XLE model use a less expensive nickel metal hydride battery. The lower end model actually uses the more expensive lithium-ion technology. The lithium-ion battery allows the vehicle to operate in electric-only mode for longer periods of time than the battery that we see in this vehicle. The other reason is the tires. The base model uses 205 width tires, which are pretty standard for hybrid mid-size sedans, and this top-end trim uses 235 width tires, which are some of the widest tires we find in a mainstream mid-size sedan. Front seat comfort comes in at 8 out of 10 points. These seats are quite comfortable for my 6-foot frame, but they're not as adjustable as you'll find in some of the competition. Most notably, we only have two-way adjustable lumbar support in the models that get the adjustable lumbar. It's getting more and more common these days to find four-way adjustable lumbar support in the mid-size sedan segment. However, we do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, and as I said before, these seats are quite comfortable for me. But if you're a little bit taller or a little bit shorter than me, then you may find some of those other seats more adjustable. In addition to that, we don't have a power passenger seat in the model that we're driving. Thanks to the longer wheelbase we get in the 2018 model, I'm going to give rear seat comfort 10 out of 10 points. If I sit back here in a very upright position, my hair is barely brushing the ceiling, but it's not touching the ceiling. And we're in the hybrid model, which actually gets 1/2 inch less headroom than the other models. And that's because Toyota no longer puts the battery in the trunk, it actually goes right here under the rear seats. This is the same trick that we will see in the all-new upcoming 2018 Honda Accord as well, but it's very different than the other hybrids sold in America. Even though this hybrid loses a little bit of headroom versus the non-hybrid model, at 38 inches, this is still among the best in the mid-size sedan segment. It's obvious when we move over to the middle seat, which is a little higher off the ground and a little bit further forward, that I still have enough headroom to sit very upright back here. Moving all the way over to the right side of the Camry, the extra wheelbase we see in the 2018 model is obvious because I still have about 2.5 to 3 inches of legroom left, even though this front seat is all the way back in its tracks. Because Toyota tends to use more thickly padded front seats than some of the competition, the footwell is a little bit tighter than some of the other vehicles in this segment, but I definitely have more than enough legroom. Rear seat passengers get a softly padded center armrest with 2 large cup holders. The rear seats also fold in a 60-40 fashion, but these do not fold flat with the trunk area. They're about 6 inches higher off the ground than the trunk. Because the battery lives under the rear seat, not in the trunk like the previous generation Camry Hybrid, we get exactly the same trunk that we find in the non-hybrid model at 15.1 cubic feet. And unusually for hybrid, it looks like there's enough room under the load floor for a full-size spare tire if you were able to relocate the jack and the tire iron somewhere. The previous generation Camry Hybrid had a very small trunk pass-through. It was really more of a cargo slot, suitable for a loaf of French bread or possibly a baguette, but not really large cargo. And that's different for this model because the battery is now located under that rear seat, as I said earlier. They give you a very slight ramp here so you can push cargo up onto the rear seat backs, but other than that, it's pretty much the same as the regular Camry. Thanks to the new location of the battery, I'm going to give this trunk 9 out of 10 points because this is very large and accommodating for a hybrid sedan in America. Now I do have to deduct just 1 point because there's no helper handle on the inside or the outside of the trunk lid. In our child seat test, we were able to fit 3 seats across the rear, but they were a little tighter than the Honda Accord, so especially if you're planning on using larger child seats than these Graco Classic Ride 50s, you may want to limit the child seat count to 2 back here. However, because of the increased legroom that we find in the Camry, I had no problem fitting the seat in a rearward-facing configuration. As we look around the interior, keep in mind we are in the SE trim of the hybrid, so there are a few things that are different depending on the trim level that you get. Our model has the optional moonroof, and we also have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger. The headrests are 2-way adjustable, and the seats in our model are New Lux trimmed with a fabric center section. As you'd expect in a mainstream mid-size sedan, we do find a decent amount of hard plastics on the front doors, although we do have a soft touch upper sill and a soft touch armrest. There's also a moderately sized bottle holder right down here below that armrest and door handle. The biggest change for 2018 on the inside really is the dashboard design, which has this accentuated sort of Y design. The primary touch point on the passenger side is this stitched pleather section. We then have a metallic effect trim section right here. This changes depending on the model that you're in, and then a chrome strip that runs and then circles around that air vent on the other side. The upper section of the dashboard is a soft touch injection molded material. The glove compartment is a slot style glove compartment, and I was able to fit a tablet computer inside. In the center of everything, we have two large air vents, and then we have the latest version of Toyota's infotainment and navigation system. Although this looks a little bit different than the previous generation, the software is basically the same with some slightly different graphics. The home screen is configurable. You can change what is in these three different zones. Right now we have the hybrid information system, phone contacts, and of course Sirius XM radio over there. We have some direct access buttons on the side, and what I like about this system is that it combines some physical controls with the touchscreen itself. That's definitely different than some of Honda's latest systems, which really are focusing just on the touchscreen. One thing you won't find in this system, however, is Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Instead, we have a standard USB or Bluetooth media interface. However, like the previous generation Toyota infotainment and navigation system, we do have full control over our USB media interface via voice commands, and you can browse your Bluetooth media library. Below the infotainment screen, we find the controls for the dual-zone climate control system. This button over here helps improve system efficiency in the hybrid model. Below the climate controls, we find a single USB input and auxiliary input and a 12-volt power outlet. We also find a Qi wireless charging mat that opens to reveal a small storage cubby where you could easily put wallets or smartphones, that sort of thing. One downside in this vehicle is that the USB and auxiliary input and this 12-volt power port are not hidden away in this storage cubby, so they are just out there on the dashboard. Between the front seats, we find a pretty typical console shifter. Drive is all the way here back towards the driver. We then have a sport mode by pulling this over to the left, and then you can manually change the gears by pushing away from the driver for gear up, pulling towards the driver for gear down. Of course, since we're in a hybrid, these are simulated gear changes. To the right of that, we have two large cup holders, and then we have a button bank on the driver's side. This is where you'll find the mode selector, Eco, Normal, and Sport for the hybrid system, auto brake hold, an EV mode button, and an electric parking brake. Toyota has updated the vehicle's remote control with this new, more attractive model that says Camry right there on the back. And then we have new heated seat controls for the driver and the front passenger. Between the driver and front passenger seats, we find a softly padded center armrest. This opens to reveal a moderately sized storage cubby where you could very easily put wallets and keys, that sort of thing. I was not able to fit a gallon of milk inside, but a half gallon would fit. Since we're driving the hybrid model, the instrument cluster is slightly different than the other Camrys. We have a power, eco, and charge gauge over here on the left, and then the traditional analog speedometer over here on the right. In the center of everything, we have a color multifunction display. Toyota put some of the vehicle's system readouts in this multifunction display, like the EV mode, the eco mode, and the blind spot monitoring system, but you'll notice that rear cross traffic detection is a separate light over here off of that screen, and brake hold assist is over there on the right side of your screen inside that speedometer. Putting the car in sport mode changes this multifunction display to red, and this is where you'll find your typical trip computer readouts, energy monitor. We also have infotainment readouts, status of the vehicle's safety systems, including the radar adaptive cruise control and the lane keeping assistance. You'll also find vehicle messages and the ability to change the way certain vehicle systems behave. Toyota updated the steering wheel design for 2018. We have two sport grips up top, and it's a 3-spoke design with this large center spoke at the bottom. The controls for the cruise control system are no longer found on a stalk that moves with the steering wheel. They're now on the steering wheel itself. Since all Camry models come standard with radar adaptive cruise control, all models will have this distance following button right here, and then we have a lane keeping assistance button below that. The controls for the infotainment system are split, so on the right side of the steering wheel we find the mode button and then track forward backward. On the left side of the wheel we find a voice command button, volume up and down, a phone button, and then these buttons, along with the back button, control that multifunction display. Also new for 2018 are the shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel. Again, keep in mind we are in the hybrid model, so this is a little unusual. The paddles are attached to the steering wheel, not the steering column, and they toggle in an interesting way. As I pull the paddle towards the driver, this plus icon actually toggles away from the driver. Acceleration in all models of the Camry has improved notably for 2018. The base 4-cylinder model drops down from 8.5 seconds 0 to 60, which was one of the slower entries in this segment, down to 7.3 thanks to the brand new engine and most importantly that new 8-speed automatic. That means that the Camry has gone from one of the slower entries to one of the faster entries if we're talking about that base and most popular engine design. The The hybrid model that we're driving has a very slight improvement over 2017. This drops down to 6.9 seconds from 7 seconds flat. That means this is exactly the same 0 to 60 time as the Honda Accord hybrid, and about a full second faster than the Sonata hybrid or the Optima hybrid. If you spend the extra cash to get the V6 under the hood, and you should know that that's about $4,000 more expensive than it was last year, then you will go from 0 to 60 under 6 seconds. Now, we haven't had a chance to test the V6 model yet, but do expect a video on that coming up soon. In our braking test score, we ran from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 119 feet, which is excellent for a hybrid, and that's all thanks to the tire size we have on this model. Toyota decided to put 235 with 18-inch tires on this hybrid, which is very unusual. Keep in mind that this is the heaviest version of the Camry. The hybrid model actually manages to be ever so slightly more expensive than the V6 model, so if you do get those top-end trims of the 4-cylinder or the V6, they're likely going to stop shorter than this. Overall handling ability has never really been a top priority with the Toyota Camry, but that's changed for 2018 as well. The Camry did not get much lighter for this model year. It still ranges between 3,250 pounds and about 3,550 pounds, although that is still on the lighter end of the mid-size sedan segment. The hybrid model that we're driving here, again, even though this is the heaviest Camry available, is only about 200 pounds heavier than a Mazda 6, but this actually has wider tires than that Mazda. And unsurprisingly, when we start driving the Camry harder, this really handles very well for a hybrid vehicle, and actually very well for a mid-size American sedan, period. The rear suspension design has also been significantly improved for the 2018 model year, and it helps this car feel much more confident than the 2017 model. As we see in many vehicles with electric power steering, the steering wheel is still pretty numb. It's hard to tell exactly what the front tires are doing, so this feels less engaging than a Mazda 6, even though it will actually hold the road better than that Mazda. And again, we're talking about the hybrid trim. Not only did the tires get wider in this top-end hybrid trim, they're wider across a decent variety of different Camry trims, from the SE to the XLE, and again, the hybrid models, SE and XLE. That means that unlike previous generations of the Camry, which handled well in certain trims, most versions of the Camry for 2018 will handle right like the model we're driving. That means that really for the first time, the sporty trims of the Camry compare very well to top-end trims of the Ford Fusion or the Honda Accord when it comes to overall handling ability. The firmer suspension in the 2018 model year is noticeable out on this rougher road. Of course, we are driving the hybrid model today, and this has one of the softer suspension tunes in the Camry lineup. So even though we are in the hybrid SE, this is not quite as firm as the regular SE. Many mid-size sedans are going to slightly firmer suspension tunes because, again, the role of the mid-size sedan has been changing in America. And that's part of why this still gets an A- when it comes to overall ride comfort, because there are many mid-size sedans in America that are firmer than this. Of course, that does drop down to a B+ if you get certain versions of the non-hybrid Camry. One thing that you'll definitely notice out on rougher roads is the new double wishbone suspension in the rear. It's a much more elegant rear suspension design than the previous generation Camry had. The rear suspension in previous models could get a little upset if you were in corners, pushing the car hard over broken pavement, and that's not happening in this 2018 model year. Of course, as we see in other Camry models, if you do start pushing this vehicle hard, the stability control system will interact early and pretty aggressively, and it cannot be disabled. In our cabin noise test, we scored 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which drops this down to a C+. This is relatively middle of the pack when it comes to mainstream mid-size sedans. You will definitely find quieter interiors in top-end trims of the Kia Optima, especially the Optima Hybrid, the Hyundai Sonata, or even the Honda Accord. When it comes to fuel economy, I'm going to give this a B. We have been averaging 43 miles per gallon over a week of very mixed driving. That's 3 miles per gallon less than the EPA says we should get. The likely reason for that, of course, is the wide tire package that we have on this model. Now, unless you get the base LE hybrid trim, you are going to get these tires on all the other Camry hybrids. The other reason, of course, as I said earlier, is the lithium-ion battery pack that we find in the base model Camry hybrid, and we don't find that in this top-end trim. That means that the driving experience is going to be slightly different whether you're driving the top-end trim or the bottom-end trim, because the lithium-ion battery pack allows the hybrid system to stay in EV mode much longer. It also allows it to regenerate electricity back into the battery pack more aggressively than this nickel metal battery pack does. One of the big things you'll notice about this hybrid system versus Toyota's hybrid systems of the past is the braking performance and the braking feel. Previous Toyota hybrids had some troubles transitioning from moderate braking, like we're doing right here, to more aggressive braking. If you made that sort of transition in the past, previous Toyota hybrid systems felt like there was a moment where nothing was going on. It felt like the brakes hadn't engaged yet, and then all of a sudden you'd get brake engagement. However, this generation of the hybrid system has completely solved that problem. And now this feels more like the hybrid braking systems we see in the Kia, Hyundai, and Honda models. A slew of brand new engines and a brand new transmission were surprising enough for the Toyota Camry, but the way the Camry drives out on the road really is the biggest surprise for 2018, because the Camry has never really been overly competitive when it comes to handling feel or handling ability, but that's quite different for this 2018 model. In addition to that, fuel economy and performance have also improved in the Camry. So instead of just being known as the most reliable midsize sedan, this also ends up being one of the most fun. As I said at the beginning of the video, we were driving the hybrid this week. And that means in this comparison section, we'll be talking about the hybrid Camry and how it stacks up with other hybrid sedans on the market, not how the regular Camry compares with the other mid-size sedans. If you want to know how the regular Camry, that is the non-hybrid model, compares, then be sure and stay tuned for our complete review on that coming up soon. The first thing to know about the hybrid Camry is that it starts in LE trim, not L trim like the non-hybrid model. The trim difference accounts for some of the price variance that we see between the hybrid and the non-hybrid Camry, and you'll also notice that we find features in the LE hybrid that we do not find in the non-hybrid LE. For instance, the non-hybrid Camry LE does not get full speed range radar cruise control. It'll only operate above about 20 miles an hour or so. However, the hybrid model does get the full speed range package that we see in the higher end trims of the non-hybrid Camry. As you're comparing the hybrid trims to the non-hybrid trims, keep those small differences in mind. To sum everything up, the hybrid is going to cost you about $2,000 to $2,400 more than a non-hybrid Camry, depending exactly on how you configure those models. For the extra cash, you get a faster 0 to 60 time, and you get about 18 miles per gallon better fuel economy if you're comparing the LE to the LE hybrid. At current gas prices in California, that would save you about $400 a year, and your payback time is somewhere around 5 years. That gets longer if you're taking a look at the SE or the XLE version of the Camry, because we get those wider tires, the different battery, and the lower fuel economy score. That will stretch out your payback time to somewhere around 8 years. Moving along to the pros and cons section, the biggest pro for the Camry Hybrid is that there are few compromises. The price tag is a little bit higher than the regular 4-cylinder Camry, but aside from that and a half-inch reduction in rear seat headroom, there's really no compromise for the Camry Hybrid. Of course, the new 2018 Honda Accord should also have its battery pack located under the rear passenger seat, but we haven't been able to drive that one yet, and it's not for sale yet in America. That no compromises description applies to every aspect of the Camry Hybrid, especially when you're comparing SE to SE Hybrid or XLE to XLE Hybrid, because the handling in the XLE models is almost identical to the regular 4-cylinder Camry. The wide 235 width tires and the retuned suspension definitely give the Camry Hybrid a sporty feeling that it's never had in the past. On the downside, we don't find 4-way adjustable lumbar support on the driver's side in any of the Camry models, and that is something that we're starting to see in mainstream midsize sedans. The only other complaint I had about the Camry Hybrid is that the door sills and the armrests on the doors are not as soft as some of the competition. So if you are the kind of person that likes to rest your arm on that door sill, then it is going to be less comfortable than some of the other options. The fiercest competitor for the Camry is the Honda Accord, so it really should be no surprise that the fiercest competitor for the Camry Hybrid is the Accord Hybrid. Of course, I'm talking about the 2017 Accord Hybrid, because the 2018 Hybrid has not been released yet. We haven't driven one yet, so we don't know what that will be like. The Accord Hybrid gets Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, features that we don't see in the Camry Hybrid and we don't expect to see anytime soon. Toyota says that they're really not interested in developing smartphone interfaces that use CarPlay or Android Auto at this time. The hybrid system that we find in the Accord is perhaps the biggest difference between the Accord and the Camry. The Camry uses a version of the same hybrid system that Toyota has been selling for years in America, and a lot of people are very familiar with it. But the Honda Accord uses a very, very different hybrid system. It has a large electric motor that drives the wheels, and then it has a generator connected to the gasoline engine. The Accord is one of the only serial hybrids in America, and the gasoline engine cannot power the wheels directly below about 45 miles an hour or so, and that results in a very different hybrid system feeling. It's fairly noticeable out on open highways, where the system will switch in and out of serial or parallel hybrid mode depending on the terrain of the road that you're driving on. The result is that the hybrid system in the Accord is not quite as smooth as the one that we see in the Camry. Now, in previous generations of the Accord, it has made up for that with absolutely excellent hybrid brake feel, But that's something that Toyota has really worked on for the 2018 Camry, and the Camry now has brake feel that is very comparable to what we see in the Accord. The Accord's hybrid system does give us better fuel economy, especially in our tests, however. We were averaging over 50 miles per gallon the last few times we drove the Accord hybrid, and this time in the Camry hybrid in the SE trim, we were getting around 42 to 43 miles per gallon. Next up, we have the Chevy Malibu hybrid. The Malibu uses a variant of the hybrid drive system that we see in the Chevy Volt, only it's been tweaked for hybrid use rather than plug-in hybrid use. The Malibu is definitely big and comfortable, but the back seats are actually more comfortable for passengers in the Camry. The hybrid system that we find in the Chevy Malibu also had troubles living up to its lofty numbers. They're advertising 46 miles per gallon combined, which is about the same as the Camry that we were driving this week. However, it actually averaged us about 41 miles per gallon, which is below what we actually got in the Camry. In addition to that, the battery takes up a large area of the trunk, and handling is not up to the standard that we see in the Camry. And lastly, the Camry ends up being a better hybrid value than the Malibu, and that did surprise me a little bit because generally Chevy has been one of the better entries in this segment when it comes to value. But Toyota's inclusion of their latest active safety systems and all the standard feature content we find even in the base model of their hybrid Camry really is what has tipped the balance. You may find a bigger discount over MSRP over at the Chevy dealer than at the Toyota dealer, but actually when you factor in the standard safety equipment we find on the Camry, you'd have to get about $2,000 off of that Malibu in order to have it equal the value that we see in the Toyota. Next up, we have the Ford Fusion Hybrid. This is one of the older hybrids in the segment, and it also has had troubles achieving its fuel economy scores. At 42 miles per gallon, it has one of the lowest combined EPA scores in this segment, but every time we've driven one, we've had troubles getting more than just high 30s. The trunk in the Fusion Hybrid is quite small, and it's also a little awkwardly shaped. That's likely because the Fusion is one of the older hybrid midsize sedans. When you look at the specifications, it would appear that the Fusion's rear seats are just as accommodating as the Camry's in terms of rear seat legroom and rear seat headroom. But in the real world, that rear seat compartment in the Fusion is very tight. That's especially true with headroom. I found the Fusion's rear seats much less comfortable than what we find in the Accord or the Camry, even though on paper it looks like the Fusion's rear seats are large. Handling has long been a big selling point with the Ford Fusion, but 2018 changes that in favor of the Camry. Next up, we have the Kia Optima. This has been one of my favorite mid-size hybrid sedans. As a brand, Kia has been known for giving us excellent value, but here is another area where the Camry really excels. Although the Optima has a lower starting price, we don't find the same kind of feature content on that base Optima hybrid as we do in the Camry hybrid, most notably those active safety systems. If you want those on your Optima hybrid, you do have to pay a decent amount more. In terms of overall value, it becomes a very close heat in top-end trims. The Optima overall has a more traditional feel to it than the Camry hybrid, and that's thanks to the 6-speed transmission that is more of a traditional design than what we find out of the Toyota hybrid system. In our tests, fuel economy out of the Optima hybrid and the related Sonata hybrid were just about what we see in the Camry. However, the Camry handles better and it goes from 0 to 60 faster than the Optima. The Optima fights back with a few extra features that we don't see in the Toyota, especially if we're taking a look at the top-end trims, where we find ventilated seats, standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, rear window shades, 4-way adjustable lumbar support. The interior is a little bit more comfortable in the Optima in the front seats, but a little bit less comfortable in the back seats. Ultimately, for me, the Optima hybrid does fall behind the Camry hybrid. However, Kia does have one additional trick up their sleeves, the plug-in Optima, and that has been one of my favorite mid-size sedans, period. Because the plug-in Optima has a plug, and you can charge that battery and operate in EV-only mode, it does qualify for a federal tax rebate. And if you qualify for that, it could drop that top-end price down to $36,000, which would make it a decent discount over the Camry hybrid. Of course, the trunk does shrink even further because the bigger battery has to live in the trunk, and of course, it's bigger than the regular Optima. But in California, it will allow you to access the carpool lane, and oddly enough, the fuel economy improves in that model in real-world driving, even though, according to its EPA score, it should actually be getting lower fuel economy than the standard Optima hybrid. In our week of mixed driving in that vehicle, not charging it, we averaged about 50 miles per gallon. Therefore, my top two picks in the hybrid midsize sedan category have to be the Toyota Camry and the Kia Optima plug-in hybrid. Of course, if you're looking for a traditional hybrid, not a plug-in hybrid, then the absolute winner is the 2018 Camry. My bottom line for the 2018 Camry hybrid is that this really is the first no-compromises mid-size hybrid sedan that we've ever seen in America. It also is by far the most fun the Camry has ever been. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2018 Camry Hybrid. Be sure and stay tuned for a full review on the non-hybrid Camry coming up very soon. In the meantime, find us over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos. You can also head over to patreon.com and find us over there if you want to support this channel. I'll see you next week.